and very excited. So in terms of the process, Mark will take 45 minutes or so to basically present his material. He can take clarification questions during the presentation. You can hold your questions, any technical questions, till the end of the presentation. And then the audience will be allowed to ask questions. And once the audience is done with questions, the audience will be will leave the room so that the committee can continue the discussions. In terms of the break, you can walk to the outside area and enjoy the view, I guess, when the committee is continuing that part.
Thank you, Dr. Chinham, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks to all of you for coming today. As Dr. Chinham mentioned, this has been a long process, and I appreciate all those that have been involved throughout it, through the encouragement, through the asking me if I'm done yet, through the other questions I've gotten over time. I greatly appreciate all of you being here and all that everybody's done along the way. I do want to start with acknowledgments. I know you typically do this at the end, but I did want to start, which is acknowledging some folks that were heavily involved in the process. Obviously, the folks that are listed up here, my committee members, starting with Dr. Chinham. Many revisions, many discussions, lots of time that we spent on this to make sure the wording was right and that everything was covered, as well as its leadership for the GET program. I don't know if many of you know about that, but this is the Global Executive Track PhD program. Obviously, most people traditionally do a PhD right after they finish their undergraduate and usually their master's graduate studies, go right into a PhD. This program was designed for professionals, people that were already in the workforce, already experienced out there, and could apply it not only in the classroom, but then hopefully also to some of the analysis they provided along the way. So thank you for your support, and thank you for all the work that we've done together. Leslie's on the phone here. Thank him for leading the department and keeping this going, this program. He's given me a lot of input and got me prepared for this as well, and I appreciate his help. Tony helped us get this room, which is fantastic. She also taught us the quantitative and qualitative analysis way back a long time ago I took that class. But she inspired me to do what you're going to see in the qualitative section from the analysis perspective today. So thank you for that. Jim Anderson, my mentor, my supporter, my instructor as well, even at Urban Science as well. He's taught me so much along the way, and I appreciate all his help. Actually, he helped me start this process. He was looking at Urban Science to have a PhD, and he asked our Human Resources Department to look into that, and someone asked me, do I know anybody that might be interested in getting their PhD? And went home, talked to my wife, talked to the family. They told me, absolutely don't do that. No, they didn't. They said, go ahead if you want. You know, it's going to be tough. I just finished my master's 5 or 6 years before, but decided to take this journey and see how it went. And it was a long one, but it was a fruitful one. So thank you, Jim. And Reinhard Fischer, who I hope is joined in, or was potentially going to be here today, he opened his brand to us to basically do some of this research. And it's tough for a lot of the automotive manufacturers to do that, to want to do that, to be able to access to their dealerships, dealership personnel, and I appreciate his help and support in being able to do that, as well as his input on the analysis as well. Of course, my family, Nancy, Nathan, Sierra, always there for me. You've always given me the encouragement, get it done. When is it going to get done? I appreciate that. That kept me focused. That kept me thinking about what I need to do next in order to be able to achieve this. And I appreciate all your help. And this taught the kids as well. Never quit. Never quit. There's always a way, and if you keep trying, eventually we'll find that way. And also, always keep learning, right? But the learning hasn't stopped. Here I'm 42 years old, and we're still learning. My parents, who are on the phone today, they told me my job was going to school back in. And my mom was to clean the house. She's a stay-at-home mom. And my dad was to go to work every day. That's what I was told when I was a kid. Well, I think I'm kind of finishing my job a little bit here. I guess I got to find a new one somewhere. But thanks for all your love and support as well throughout the process. And of course, my Urban Science family here today, a lot of representatives. Appreciate it, especially Randy Berlin might be on the phone. Dave Creech helped me a lot on the early end of this as we were doing some analysis with a major dealer group here in the United States. And finally, all my friends, thank you for coming today. Thanks for your support. So let's get started on the actual material here. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to talk about the motivation for doing this. Why did I decide to pursue this? What is the point? What was the value? And eventually we'll talk about the results. So we'll first talk about an overview of the research. So where did this come from? What are some of the bases in literature that this was generated from? We'll then talk about quantitative analysis first. Quantitative is, as you can imagine, quantities, numbers. So this is analyzing data, and this is analyzing data that generally exists in our automotive world. And really, we're applying this, as we go through this, also to other retail spaces as well, because I think a lot of the same analysis that we've done here could apply to any franchisee type model. Then we'll talk about qualitative analysis. This has to do with, as you can imagine, quality. So that will be more of an assessment of things that aren't as concrete, aren't as discrete in nature. And finally, we'll end with some contributions and conclusions around our practical insights that we found, future research that we can do, as well as our contribution to literature and research. All right, so starting with the motivation. So a lot of industries have embraced data analytics, but not a lot in the automotive space. I think it applies to retail in a lot of ways. You've heard of things out there in banking. We talk about digital media, digital marketing a lot, and the analytics that are being done there. So you look at Google and you see that there's these couple ads that you see at the top. Well, those are bought, and there was analytics behind deciding to put those there. As I look out the window as well and see Little Caesars Arena, I think of sports as well. Who's seen the movie Moneyball? A lot of you. Movie Moneyball, I'd like to say I'm Brad Pitt out of that movie. I'm more the Jonah Hill, unfortunately. But Jonah Hill goes out, he creates this algorithm to help them identify who are the best targets to bring on the Oakland Athletics. Because the Oakland Athletics were in trouble at the time from a franchise standpoint. Profit. They needed to fill seats. So how are they going to do that? Well, Brad Pitt, in the movie, decides to go with some of the analytics that Jonah did to eventually apply that to making those selections. Specifically, you'd have a room like this, with a bunch of guys talking about their experiences, what they thought were the right things to do. But in the end, they ended up going with that and ended up being very successful. And now, teams like the Red Wings, like the Pistons, all have analytics teams on them to do this sort of, even at the college level, to do this sort of analysis. So how can we apply this to automotive as well, especially with all the data that we have? Dealerships have a lot of commonly used processes out there that they believe is the right thing to do, but unfortunately a lot of that hasn't been vetted thoroughly, analytically. It's just accepted norms that we typically see out there, especially with the consultants that come in as well. It's based on their things that they've seen, their experiences, rather than being concrete, data-driven results. Dashboards and performance scorecards are shown throughout the literature as something that businesses should rely on. Dashboards are, as you can envision, dashboard of your car, are basically the display of certain metrics at a given point in time. Scorecards are, you can expect a report card, like a summary of all of those metrics. And this is heavily provided in the literature about a lot of research, what to include. A lot is very high level and very basic. And even in the automotive industry, it has been seen that there are a lot of these components that exist out there, but they don't necessarily provide the value that they should. One challenge that the automotive space does come across is the difficulty to obtain some of the data, particularly in the granularity needed to be able to do some of the research I'm talking about. So ideally, you get into some of the details within the dealer systems, all the data from the manufacturers that they have, but that can be hard to get a hold of, especially with a lot of it being very well guarded, especially at the dealership level. So talking more about the motivation, dealership profitability actually has been dropping. It's surprising to many people. We think the economy is great. We saw the unemployment statistic come out here recently. It's at the lowest in 49 years or something like that. But dealership profitability has not been increasing throughout this period. So the danger there is that these dealerships are actually running a lower profit than even say 2010. And if we go into a recession, we're going to have a problem, right? We're not going to be selling as many units. And therefore, they're not going to be able to handle the expense structure that they have to be able to turn the profit. And even relative to the economy, they often say that, and this is in literature as well, that the new vehicle sales kind of leads the economy. So if we can look at that metric, we see that we've actually potentially peaked here recently. We've kind of flattened out, and actually this year I think is currently projected. I was reading something yesterday, might be less than last. So that being said, are we on our way down a little bit here, despite the fact that the economy is doing well? Dealers need to be ready. Also to note, dealerships make a lot of their money in servicing parts, not in selling new vehicles. Not many people know that or understand that. But the greatest profitability, the guides I saw in the literature as far as typical numbers on service, is a profit of 73%. And you're saying, no surprise, when I go into a dealership, that's why it costs so much. Well, maybe a little bit, but we'll get into that discussion. But on the new vehicle side, it's only about 5%. That's a substantial, and that's a goal. A lot of dealerships don't actually obtain that. So our problem of practice is trying to help dealers who do not know how to improve performance through all of their data that they have, be able to do so. There's so much out there, and I have a little prop here today to give you an example. This is what was called the Ford 1984 report. Okay? Can you guys see it in the back very well? Yes. This was, by the way, on a typical 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And it is also front and back. These are what field representatives use to go out and talk to dealers on a regular basis. You can see there's all kinds of little notes on here about what to say or what to repeat. How, with all of this, can you make decisions, or can you find a little nugget that is the right thing to do right now? Our proposal is that with our analytical process here that we're going to talk about, that there is a way. There is a way to take that and get to those few things that are the most important. And what we want to find is the overlap of what matters and what can be controlled. So just like in our lives, there's a lot of things that we think matter that probably don't. So we've got to figure out what really does matter for our end objectives. And we've got to figure out what we can actually control, because if we can't control it, why worry about it? There's also a conflict between dealers and manufacturers. So I'm going to use, by the way, the term OEM that refers to manufacturers. Well, what we found is that there's a consistent conflict between the objectives of both sides. It's not just everyone wants to sell a lot of cars. As I just explained to you, service is where dealerships make a lot of profits. Well, how does that help? Some more parts that continue with parts. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they sell more vehicles, but manufacturers. And we'd like to get to a point where we're at a win-win state. So what I mean by a win-win state is that both sides, the dealers and the manufacturers, have achieved their goals. Talking more about. So in the literature, we found some gaps. First of all, business analytics discussed for decades, but seldomly in automotive. We really didn't find much literature that applied to the automotive space when it came down to this topic. And when I say business analytics, by the way, I'm talking about that making decisions based on data science needs. Also, effective analytics-driven processes for selection and management of KPIs, again, hadn't been strongly researched in the retail space. We did find stuff that was relevant to customers, to employees, survey-based stuff, but nonetheless, there was not a lot about how to run a retail operation. There's also a lack of case studies surrounding it. So how to utilize these key performance indicators, another acronym I'll use. We have quite a few of them that we're talking about today, but KPIs, or key performance indicators, where those are typically managed, but there's not a lot about how this has actually been utilized to achieve end goals. Also, retail outlet analysis has not been addressed for automotive dealerships in the literature that we looked at. They have a lot of data, but there's not a lot of analysis behind that, and we think a lot of that's due to the fact that the data is not readily available, not easily accessible. In-dealership activities and emotional factors are not addressed. So this gets back to automotive again, but it's also true for a lot of retail. It's like the individual processes. How do we apply those processes or find within all those processes what are the most important in order to be successful? As I mentioned, most of the analysis really is about customers, and it's not the business itself with their cultures, their attitudes, but rather satisfaction, pricing, discrimination, all different pieces that we found in the literature review that we did. And again, the struggle between the manufacturer and the retailer. Again, not a lot about that. It was mentioned in a couple cases that were mentioned particularly here, but overall there wasn't a lot of literature that referred that issue, because it is something that is very strongly in automotive that probably doesn't exist as much in a lot of industries, in all retail spaces, but there are quite a few out there that it could apply to. So our research question here is, how can dealers use data-driven analytics to manage their key performance outcomes, another acronym for you, and what qualitative factors play a role in affecting observed outcomes? Okay. So what are our goals here overall? First of all, we want to come up with an effective methodology. We want to understand what that process of analysis is. It's fine having data, but the data might change at a given point in time. We want to be able to apply this elsewhere also in retail. So how do we do that unless we have a process that we can follow? Also, being able to take a large number of KPIs to make KPDs that relates to KPOs, okay? So the KPIs, again, are the indicators, so key performance indicators. That sounds like an obvious thing that must be important, but the challenge is that they're not all key. They're really just performance indicators. What we're suggesting is that you get to a point where you have figured out which are the real drivers of performance. That's where the key performance driver that relates to our KPOs, key performance outcomes. We want to follow a process also to identify questions for interviews that will eventually result in a survey. Talk about that in detail. And then we'll identify the constructs that relate to this. The constructs are basically an accumulation of these questions into groups, factors that function together, that act together, and provide some insight into the actions that should be taken in order to impact those KPIs. And then finally, being able to provide actionable recommendations. All right, the research overview. So first of all, we'll talk about the quantitative side, and I'll get into more detail in a minute. So our goal is really to guide dealers in the direction of what are these factors to improve? Where should I focus all my attention? Again, they're very busy people. If you've ever been in dealership, which I assume most of us have, it's a very busy place. There's a lot of activity going on, and a lot of these folks are trying to typically put out fires from the interviews and discussions that we have, rather than focus on. So the process kind of works overall that we start with, and this is our model of how it functions from kind of the customer deciding what to do all the way to actually purchasing a vehicle. So we start with attraction. Promotion and incentives can cause that. Inventory can cause that. A published price can cause that. That might attract you. Then you have contact. You eventually have to call the dealership, talk to the dealership, see if they have our inventory that we want, and figure out a price. We can also obviously interact with their website to understand what inventory they have and what's involved with that. Then we interact further through actually identifying the actual inventory, the selling price, and the value proposition when we're actually sitting there in the dealership. Sometimes we can do outside, but then when we actually are looking to finally purchase the vehicle, we still have to go and get it somehow. And we make a decision whether or not we're going to sell the car or buy the car. The key is, for our analysis, that we need to be able to benchmark. And in having that need to be able to benchmark, you need robust data. So the challenge is, if I go to one outlet, one dealership in this case, I can't do a robust analysis. That's what a lot of consultants actually do. Granted, they apply their experience, but still, they don't necessarily have that robust data to do all the analysis they need to do. In our case, what we're able to do is accumulate a bunch of data, be able to do analysis so we have a big enough sample to work with in order to provide results. On the qualitative side, something called concurrent triangulation design is what we use. This really, in summary, is taking interviews and surveys iteratively to figure out what are the right questions to ask and mixing that with quantitative data. So our quantitative data in our qualitative analysis were the outcomes of that profitability and that sales performance. So we're trying to figure out what qualitative things relate to them. I say, again, quality is a little bit subjective, survey-based results. It's not as discrete as I made $500 last week. Then we'll do interviews and surveys. So why are we doing that? First of all, figuring out what to interview about, which would eventually relate to what we survey about, was a process. We'll talk about that process. But based on the literature that we could find, the process of being able to go out, talk to experts, talk to industry leaders, talk to dealerships, and understand, first of all, what we should even ask questions about based upon the variances that we see in the interview responses that we're getting on certain topics. Then provide us insight into what we should ask in a broader survey so we collect greater data. Also, what we do at the end here is, again, take those survey results and associate that with dealer performance, and then apply that to both the dealership and manufacturer side and their desired results, their key performance. So the methods we took on the quantitative versus the qualitative study that you're about to see. First of all, our goals. On the quantitative side, as I mentioned, the process. On the qualitative side, is to understand which of those factors impact performance. Relative to data collection, we want concrete data on the quantitative side, actual transaction level data. Ideally, we get into the dealer's dealer management system, or DMS, and get every single piece of detail that we can get about everything they're doing in the dealership. Now, granted, that would be a task in itself to accumulate that data and to parse through to find anything that's important, because they consume everything. There's so many details, and that's why the automotive space is so robust and exciting to attack, because it has so much detail. You go to Best Buy and purchase something, they don't necessarily, they're not able to track all of the details about your purchase back to specific people that live at specific addresses and understand their history. In automotive, you can do that. The data's there, but sometimes it's hard to get. On the qualitative side, again, we're going to use interviews and surveys. For our quantitative study relative to the methods we're going to use, we're going to focus on a statistical analysis. There's also statistical analysis involved on the qualitative side as we use grounded theory and then apply principal components analysis and partial least squares regression to come up with what those factors are amongst this big group of questions. So take a big group of questions, take that down to a small number of factors, and from those factors, figure out which are the most statistically important factors relative to the results that we want to see. Okay, the quantitative study. Just get started, folks. All right, so our methodology. Here's an outline here. Let's look at pictures. Starting with data collection, figuring out what KPIs to even analyze. So we've got to create these KPIs. And by the way, KPIs are often formulas. They're not just dollars of sales. It might be dollars of sales divided by number of people or whatever. There's a variety of different ways to do many, many KPIs that exist out there. But we weren't confident that we had them all covered, and we wanted to be able to analyze additional ones beyond those that are traditionally used within the industry, and that those that were anywhere in any literature that we looked at. Then through modeling, we want to be able to understand, relative to the KPIs we're trying to achieve, what are the most telling, what are the most driving factors relative to the operation. So we identify those KPIs, apply our conceptual model to figure out what the process should be then to be able to identify where those opportunities are for any given dealership. Now, ideally, it's not part of this analysis today, is also include a feedback loop relative. What I mean by that is that over time, you're learning more. These things are happening. You would experience this after you're actually providing this analysis to a dealer, and then you'd be able to get their reaction. Well, did it work? I suggested you do this. Did you do that, first of all? And then if you did that, did it actually impact things as I thought it would impact things? By the way, this methodology is also based upon a lot of expert people. So this wasn't just something we came up on our own. This is based on a lot of discussion, a lot of interviews. So where does all this data come from? I mentioned already about the DMS, the dealer management system. There's also something called CRM data, customer relationship management data. Every time you go into a dealership, they're taking as much notes, as much information about you as they can to understand, first of all, what are you looking for, and can I call you back when you leave the dealership and didn't buy, because they want to try to sell to you. But also they want to track that over time through your service experiences and so forth, be able to understand when you visit and how often, and so forth. So there's a lot of data out there, and a lot of it from the dealership can either be made into decisions by the dealership to just do certain things based on their own data, or certain data sets are also provided to the manufacturer, particularly financial statements. That's a requirement that dealerships provide their financial data on a regular basis to the manufacturer. That's data that we can access through the manufacturer if it is available for analysis. From the dealership data, manufacturer data, as well as industry registration data. So industry registration data being when you go to Secretary of State here in Michigan or the Department of Motor Vehicles in another state, that registration, when you go get your license plate, that is something that is available. Now, we can't get all the people's names and understand your addresses and so forth, but we are able to understand some components of that data that we're able to link to relative to the sales records. We get to understand that a vehicle was purchased and here's where that person lives, actually, through matching. From all this, we can generate KPIs to analyze. That's what we're really trying to get with this. As I mentioned, we have sales and registration data. The financial statement data is really a big deal to be able to access. Again, that takes a lot of trust. Whoever is going to be provided this data isn't going to do anything nefarious with it, given that it is highly protected. And we need network-wide data. You want all the dealers because you want to be able to compare and benchmark. When I say benchmark, if you're a dealership here in Detroit, say you're right here downtown, and you want to compare yourself, who should you compare to? Compare the whole nation? Compare to the state? Compare to the metro area? What should you compare to that's appropriate for me? And most dealers will say something for local. Although, as we'll talk about in a minute, their agreement with manufacturer is often for some other average, for instance, state average. All right, variable operationalization, that's right there. What is that? So we're trying to create variables here using the data that we have. So as an example, if we took sales performance, so we're going to talk about sales effectiveness today. Sales effectiveness is a metric that's widely used in the automotive industry, where 100% is average. So don't think 100%, oh, it's an A+. 100% is average, like a C, okay? So whenever I say sales effectiveness and I talk about the score that the dealer gets relative to the amount of sales, this is how much they're selling relative to how much they should sell, okay? Based upon the customers in the area, the demand that exists, the opportunity that exists. We can take a look at that, first of all, compared to what we call days supply. This is basically a metric of their inventory relative to how much they usually sell. So you can think days supply. It's how many days of inventory I have that if I kept selling as I currently sell, how long would it take for me to run out? We look at that, we can see that the highest sales performance for dealers would be for lower days supply. It makes sense to have less inventory, less things to sell, and perform better. But if you take that metric, that day supply metric, instead of looking at it relative to what you do sell, look at it relative to what your expected sales are, what you should sell. We actually see that the curve goes in the opposite direction. That where your day supply based on the expectation of sales, when you're doing better with that, when you have more supply, your sales performance goes up. Makes sense, right? But guess what? The industry typically uses days supply to evaluate their dealerships. Why would you do that? There's no relationship there with what you're trying to achieve. The manufacturer is trying to sell vehicles. We also want to get to the point where we have actions that can happen based on our analysis. We don't want to just provide, oh, your profitability is low. Good luck. Good luck with that. Well, there's a million things you could do. We want to get to a point where we're providing something that they can actually do something with the analysis. So as I mentioned earlier, we have these key performance outcomes that we're looking at, particularly performance measurement on the rung of sales effectiveness, And then profitability, we look at return on sales. It's a common financial measure of profitability. And we do a graph here and look at our sales effectiveness and our return on sales. Put a line in here for average on each of. If dealers do well with both, we consider them to be up here in this win-win quadrant, that upper right quadrant. That's where both the manufacturer and the dealer are achieving. And that's what we want to focus on, is how to get dealers to this. So if you're this dealer here, you're doing well for your return on sales. You're highly, highly profitable. However, your sales effectiveness would be below average. So a dealer wants to get over here, but that process, that method, that pathway may not be a straight line. It may take giving up something more than you wanted to at the beginning in order to achieve that other thing that you might be deficient in. So dealers have to figure out how to implement this. This is up to them. Every store is a little bit different, but we can quantitatively give them guidance on the way to go. So here's our process. So we start with the area. So what is an area? Every dealer, at least in the United States, is assigned a territory. That's typically called a PMA, or primary market. It's based on geography, usually things like census tracts. So we know zip codes, and some brands still use zip codes. But every dealer is assigned a territory, not only for marketing purposes, but it also gives us this metric of sales effectiveness. Talk about that expected number that I was talking about, like what they should sell, based on that territory that's defined. So we've got to review that and make sure it's sensible first. Then we look at finding a reasonable and attainable benchmark or standard to evaluate these dealerships at. Like, what's the comparison? Like I mentioned, if you're a downtown Detroit dealer, who would you want to be compared to? What makes sense? What should I be compared to? From a performance perspective, then, we can come up with these metrics, these KPIs of sales effectiveness and profitability. We can then identify opportunities relative to the statistics showing us what are those key performance drivers, and highlighting those and saying, are we deficient in them? And then being able to prioritize them as well. From there, we can come up with recommendations. We can use a mathematical programming routine to identify where those top areas are for this dealership proposal. We're trying to keep it to a discrete number of things. Again, we don't want this. We want some small set, say 3 to 5 things to focus. And then finally, figuring out the impact, or estimating the impact. If I do all this, what's going to happen? What's the impact on my sales performance? What's the impact on my profitability? So as an example, we did a case study. We wanted to prove that this makes sense and that this works and this can be applied. So first of all, looking at our sample dealer, which will remain nameless, is first of all looking at the PMA and seeing if it's acceptable. Second of all, the benchmark, the standard we would select for evaluation. In this case, use what the manufacturer's agreement, the sales and service agreement is, use a state average. So by looking at that area and applying that benchmark or standard, we found that this dealer was at 68% of state average for sales and 105% state average for profitability. So above average profitability, again, not 100% with 105. It's not like, oh my gosh, this is better than everybody. No, just a little above average. But as you can imagine, 68% is not good. That's even enough in most schools, even when you are looking at 100%. So 68 is not very good. If we look at the market dealers, we also note that the market dealers can achieve this. They are, on average, for sales performance at 112% and profitability at 132%, way above average. So it is attainable even by your peers that are right around you. So it's kind of like being the student class. Why are you getting this grade that everybody else can do? And what can we do to help you improve? So markets are defined for pretty much every manufacturer, especially as I mentioned in the United States. But these territories are combined, these individual PMAs, based upon the amount of what we call cross-sell. So people leave and go to other dealers that are not their dealer in their PMA in many cases. Most of the time within the market still, that we see this crossing back and forth. I mean, just as you can imagine, as you came down here today, you may have passed X number of dealerships of a certain brand. Well, you could have technically stopped at any of them. You go down that route, you pass those locations, and you may have purchased from it. Well, in a metro area where we see that travel occurring to work, school, to whatever, we expect there to be this process. We've observed that for a long period of time. So that being said, these are then CMAs, these individual dealer areas, are combined into markets. So when I say metro or market, I'm talking about the rest of the dealers in that metro. I remember there was a commercial for Ford. They'd always say the little jingle that went with it, your 31 Metro Detroit Ford dealer, right? Well, that was their local marketing group. That was their own group that they marketed together and pooled funds together to provide that ad. But there were, I knew, 31 Metro Detroit Ford dealers, right? So that group could be a market. I don't think it exactly was, but it could have been a market as you would define analytic. Okay, so you'd expect a lot of cross-selling within that area. Answer your question? Then finding areas of opportunity. So we use generalized least squares regression to analysis. Based on literature, this was a good practice to be able to come up with what are those significant variables. Well, now, we're not advocating one particular methodology statistically to follow. I think there's others that could be applied as well. We were focused more on the process to be able to get to these results. And from our analysis, we found that the top variables were advertising per expected, used to new vehicle inventory ratio, inventory per expected, sales versus quantity per expected. So you can see that expected, that creating that KPI was very valuable to our analysis. It showed up to be significant statistically in many different fashions. So inventory for our dealer was very, very low. They were less than 1/3 of average, which is unbelievably low. So they didn't have a lot of inventory. They were short in advertising. Their used to new sales ratio was low compared to the benchmark, and they were low on sales person. Okay? So there were a lot of issues, obviously, that could relate to this potential issue of having only 68% sales performance. So as you can imagine, the recommendation addressed these areas of opportunity. So increasing traffic through advertising or more efficient marketing, the quantity or the quality of that effort. Increasing inventory, selling more used once you sell more new, because we need to sell more new first. We don't want to say sell more used because that's not necessarily going to help this number. It's selling new vehicles that we're talking about. And then adding salespeople as well. All right, so in summary on the quantitative analysis, I've got to speed things up. Applying existing methods to automotive retail, reduce the amount of content that dealers, again, need to look at. Identify what are the KPDs to manage, focus their attention on certain things because they are so busy. We try to balance OEM and dealer goals. This will also arm the field personnel with scientific results that they can go out. There's a whole field organization that calls on dealers on a regular basis. They go out and visit dealerships with the manufacturer, and they try to help dealers, try to wholesale vehicles. And this gives them more meaningful information that they can use in order to help their dealerships be successful. And then the OEMs can also understand what applies to their dealerships as far as getting the improvements they want to see. All right, on the qualitative side, first of all, our methodology. We did interviews with automotive retail. This was heavily covered in literature, that there are many cases where people go out and do expert interviews to start the process of understanding the industry and understanding what some of the concerns and challenges are, as well as where those variances existed between how different locations, different people operate. So our first phase was to go out and just say, hey, I'm interviewing you in a semi-structured interview where I'm going to sit down with you and try to understand as much as I can about your business and what you do in order to try to make change, to make a difference. And also ask you questions about some of your operational characteristics. From that, we're able to come up with a more consistent approach to the interviews. So we did 17 to start, and we're able to follow that up with 18 interviews that we know we're going to ask you. We're going to follow this structure here. We also relied on manufacturer, headquarters, and field personnel to identify those objectives that they thought were important. So that's where this comes from relative to the sales effectiveness, profitability we've discussed. Then we're able to create a survey. Again, finding areas of variance in what we were being told as far as the way dealerships operate. Culture, I'll give you an example, was one thing that from the very beginning, phase one, a lot lot of dealerships put up. It's the culture of this place that needs us to work at. Well, what is that? That's where we had to rely on the literature to look into what questions could be asked about those types of things in order to be able to ask questions properly. So we distributed our survey starting in March 2017, closed in 2017 July. We used a 5-point scale. We had 139 questions. And we got responses from 42 general managers, owners, and managers, their department managers that were going to be. But we didn't keep it to just certain brands. We didn't keep it to just certain market types. So there could be urban, rural, whatever. But we wanted to identify what were the factors that related overall to we wanted to parse this down. Again, we have 139 questions. How do we get that into something meaningful that we can do something with? That's a lot of questions. I'm thankful that they were able to complete 139 questions survey to begin with. But that was great to get that data and be able to analyze, to eventually get to the point where we're able to figure out, out of these factors, what are the most significant for driving our key performance outcomes. So here's a little background on the folks that we surveyed. So their years of employment. Through the gamut here, kind of covered everything. You can look up there. I'll go through this fairly quickly. The years that they've been employed at any dealership. Again, there's some very experienced people, some less experienced people. What were those locations like? Some were suburban, urban, rural, fairly well distributed. And then their role. Most of them were general managers. We did get some owners, and then some other managers, which again, we're going to be different. So here's our conceptual model. This is based on all of the research that we did to understand what might be the factors that relate to our KPIs. So again, we've talked about sales and profitability. We also considered loyalty as we first started doing this research. The challenge with loyalty is measuring it. What does that exactly mean, and how does the data can you actually figure out whether or not an individual is loyal, especially when we have multiple vehicles in every garage across the country for the most part, where it's hard to figure out if you're which one you're replacing at any given point in time. I just bought vehicles for children, for example. Is that replacing one of my vehicles or not? They may not be able to tell in the data, and therefore it's a little muddy trying to figure out loyalty. But there are ways to do that. And these are kind of quantitative outcomes here. These are different factors, different pieces of how management functions with people in the dealership processes. We're trying to figure out of all of this, how that relates to these outcomes. And this was our first stage, our first assessment, where we thought this would go. Of course, our analysis would provide some good. So the operational areas that we reviewed: marketing, inventory, price, selling approach. Performance and processes. Just understanding both on what we call fixed operations, which is really the back end of the dealership, service parts, as well as variable operations, which are the front end, which are we use sales. Again, that culture piece. And then understanding those attitude perceptions. So we relied heavily on literature in order to figure out what questions to ask. We don't want to just go through a bunch of questions about other things. We asked a few relative to specific processes that we gleaned from the interviews that were different ways to do things. For instance, having a sales to service handoff process. What I mean by that is, did the salesperson take you back to the service department and say, hey, here's your service advisor that you're going to come see. You bring your car in for service next time, and maybe even set a first appointment. That would be a sales. Some dealerships do that, some dealerships do not. And there's a lot that are in between. That was an area of variance that we saw, we wanted to ask about. And these were concepts that we learned that varied amongst dealerships, then we provided in the literature to come up with questions. So our results: we generated factors through principal component analysis. We considered 6 through 15 factors. Here's an example on the right here of one of the factors that end up being called internal culture. You can see that there are a variety of entries here. These are all questions that were asked. So again, we're trying to take all of these questions and pare it down into a discrete number of factors that we can manage to work with. And our goal was to have above a value of 0.6 to be included as a factor for any of these questions. And some of them are positive, some of them are diagnosed really small. Some are positive and some are negative, meaning that they have a positive or negative relationship with our performance outcomes. For instance, at the top here, the dealership lacks team spirit. Well, that's a negative thing, right? So we're going to have it have a positive influence. You'd actually have to change the words around and be in the opposite direction. design standpoint of that data. So we ended up finding an 8-factor solution. We needed to increase the iterations for convergence relative to our principal components analysis. Again, we only had 42 respondents, which was good enough. Let's do the analysis, but we'd like to have a lot more. And 71 out of 135 of the questions actually ended up in these factors. So you can see that just for this factor alone, there were a large sum. Analyzing these factors now to identify how good they are as a group or individually here at trying to provide some sort of result. Again, we're just grouping factors at this point. So it's the relationships of these questions to one another that as a group they tell us something, okay, that we're trying to figure out. We deal with 8 of them, as I mentioned. Again, look for the loading range over 0.6, which is true false. You can see how many questions were included in each of these factors. We also look at something called scale reliability. So again, trying to figure out, did these things and did they make sense as a group be together? And then, cumulatively, what is their ability to explain variance? In our case, these 8 factors explain 76% variance. Also, we want to make sure that these factors don't overlap. They don't correlate amongst themselves. So if we found a value over 0.7 in this matrix of comparing all of the factors against one another, we'd be concerned and think, we have a couple that are a little higher, 0.6, and then a 0.7. And this was our resulting model. So we pared it down and kept it simple in the standpoint that these 8 areas, these 8 factors that we came up with, principal components, all potentially relate to our 2 objectives. But again, the win-win zone for dealerships. So relative to the regression that we did, understanding factor performance, first of all, we wanted to now see, we have these 8 factors. Are they any good? They tell us anything. We found this factor 5 was always a little weak. We wanted this to be, this variable importance to be about 0.8, but that one is a little bit short. As we applied it specifically to evaluating return on sales and sales effectiveness, the relationship with return on sales and sales effectiveness, we wanted it to be, again, over 0.8, and we're now looking at it by those individual relationships. That was in combination. This is separately. Again, factor 5, not very important relative to our statistical analysis of the relationships. But everything else looked pretty good. Everything else is great. Okay. Okay, I mentioned internal culture. So I had to do with things that are going on in the dealership, how people felt about how they worked with customers, how employees worked with one another, how management worked with employees. Trying to get an understanding of how individuals reacted, worked together with the dealership. Operational processes were more concrete things, 2 ideas, as I mentioned, the sales service handoff example. Decision making. One of the questions there that comes to mind was revolving around, is it centralized or do we keep employees engaged in making decisions? So is it all at the top or is it amongst the whole dealership so we can get everybody involved? Internal communication. Do we consistently talk amongst one another? Do we allow people to have interaction across departments? Customer orientation. Again, how much time do we spend with people and to what degree? How focused are we on making them happy? What do we do with them? What is our general feeling about handling and dealing with them? Dealership management, these are again their perceptions about their employees as well as how they did things operationally. Risk propensity or innovation, how often are we likely to try new things? Are we ready to try something different in the dealership to see if that works? And then a sales and marketing focus. We spend a lot of time marketing. How do we do that? What are some of our main areas that we do focus on to be able to get the word out about what we're doing, and how quickly do we react to certain things in the marketplace? Okay, so I grayed out 5 because we were a little worried about factor number 5. Also, you might see here some negatives. That means that they're negatively related. So the opposite is what you will see. heading. The relationship. So these are the coefficients. This is a coefficient plot here. We're looking at a blue line, which is sales performance, and the red line is profitability. We want to see what the impact of each factor is on those. Because once we understand that, and if it's important to any degree, then you can suggest that if you're deficient in one of those areas that you need to improve, then we can then focus on one of those factors, the questions in more detail potentially with the dealer, figure out what we can change. So factor 5, we'll ignore that one for now. We see factoring, huge impact on sales performance, but a negative impact. This line is the 0 point. A negative impact on profitability. So for sales and marketing focus, that has a large positive impact on sales performance, but a negative impact on profitability. So people answer that question as possible. Okay? And note as well that it's very unlikely in any of these situations, for any of these factors, where blue and red are on the same side of the line. Which tells us that relative to these factors that we're looking at, they all impact those two things in opposite fashion. There's some that are close. Here, factor 7, actually there are both sides, but very small impact on profitability. That's positive purpose. Okay? So, that being said, when we get back to our win-win and the workings together of the manufacturers and the dealers, you can imagine they have an opposite impact by doing any of these. So how do you then balance your efforts to make sure that you're impacting both in the right direction to get to that? Break this down further. These are all the individual factors here on the left. There's 16 rows here because now they're assigned each and looking for their relationship with each of the sales performance. So what we're trying to find here, taking this a step further, we looked at variable importance, but now we want to see statistically is there a relationship with the outcomes we'd expect. You can see for instance, dealership operational processes, which is factor 2, we ended up with these p-values, which is a statistical measurement. If it's over 0.05, I would typically say that there's not a relationship, or it's uncertain that there's a relationship, unlikely to be a relationship. So what we'd say in those cases is that the hypothesis of the relationship would not be supported in situations where that p-value is over 0.05. So you can see that there's a few in here. Again, 5 came up again, which we're not surprised about, and then 7 in its relationship to profitability. But 2 was surprised that one overall for both sales price profitability, not a great relationship there with their outcomes. So as we look at these individual factors, what are they telling us? We did all this work. We have these 8 factors. What are they telling us? First of all, internal culture. Good team spirit and committed employees help the bottom line issue, but not necessarily sales. Okay? Remember, a lot of these are going to do things for one and not the other, between sales and profitability. Factor 2, again, is a little weak from a statistical perspective. But factor 2 tells us that dealerships are less likely to be innovative and risk-taking, are less connected, and they have profitability. That's okay, but not great sales performance. Factor 3 and 6, by the way, dealers are better at using data, are better at generating a superior profitability level. Dealers that are good at internal communications have better sales performance. Those that have greater innovation have lower sales performance, better profitability. And dealers that know their sales targets, focus on them, know their market, again, do well from a sales performance, or do not do as well from a sales performance perspective compared to having high profitability. So each of these have an impact in different ways in many cases. And this assessment allows you to be able to understand where a dealership is deficient, what they could do to change. So as we do a case study, here's our dealership example. 78% sales effective and above average return on sales. So what can we do to improve? Well, first of all, looking at the survey results for this dealership. Lower than average for factors 1, 5, and 8, and higher for 2, 3, 4, and 6. So what does that tell us? We go back to this plot again. We can see that 1, 5, and 8, where they're low, negatively impacts, at least for 1 and for 1, that would negatively impact sales performance, but 8 would positively impact sales performance. And given that they're low, you look at number 8, especially with its high impact on sales performance, and say, Well, if that has a large impact and you're low, maybe that's what's causing your sales performance. You might want to look at that one first. And they're higher than average for 2, 3, 4, and 6. If you look at 2, 3, 4, and 6, but then not surprised that they have above average profitability with the red line. It's always above. So for them, some recommendations. Survey responses that support strong positive impact on profitability were the internal culture, the interdepartmental connectedness, centralization of decision-making was occurring, speed of decision-making, but they had a lack of career management. Okay? That's not good, probably, right, for sales performance, but it does help profitability. You got to think about what it's impacting, because remember, a lot of these things go in opposite directions. And finally, they had limited free pickup and delivery service. Again, that helped profitability because I'm spending less money on it. I'm not selling as many vehicles, so that's attracting people. Things that relate to weak new vehicle sales. They don't have a family-like dealership atmosphere. And a question that said, hey, if you have a good atmosphere at your dealership, that will promote sales. They don't. The questions that were asked, therefore, we associate that with the weak new vehicle sales. Individuals across departments didn't talk. They had sufficient discussion, debate to make decisions, minimum data usage, make decisions. They were very cautious in innovativeness, and they had an inability to easily trade for vehicles. So in summary, for the qualitative study, we find that dealerships that follow the practice and science, it doesn't just make sense. We find that they're better on a sales performance side, but not a profitability side. Dealerships that use their skills for managing their businesses and profitability, which may include areas outside of new vehicle sales, obviously be better for profitability. As mentioned, service, but focused on that, I'm going to do well for profitability standpoint. Use data. If you're familiar with the data, analyze the data on a regular basis, we found that that has an impact on higher sales performance and profitability. Those that are innovative supports profitability, but not sales. So I try new things, and that helps me get more profit, but not more sales. Dealerships focus on customers and employees, following typical guidelines. We're able to achieve those new vehicle sales targets, but profitability may suffer. And again, culture was something that came up quite often. Our conclusions and contributions. So finishing up here, our practical insights. First of all, our quantitative process for us, summarizing what we just talked about. We're using a large amount of data, a large volume of data to help make decisions for business. We have that conflict we have to manage relative to the KPIs that we talked about. And the qualitative analysis looked at things that the data that we get only does not provide us. The interviews and surveys helped us provide recommendations. As we saw, those two lines tend to oppose. So how can we manage that then, relative to those 8 factors, in order to improve the area where we're not happy very well? And we understand their impact on both sales and profits. So our remarks, the analysis provided, I think, can be used not only in automotive, but in retail, anywhere you have this type of information. Now, this win-win thing, automotive, I think, is something that, obviously, through all the interviews and all the work we did, we found to be a substantial thing. I think by industry, we have to evaluate that, but I think this could apply elsewhere. Again, the actions may have opposing impacts, so we need to understand the balance that we need. And then there's a lot more additional research that can be done as we go through this. Conference presentation. We've had opportunity to actually throw this out there in front of others, particularly at the Informs Conference last November. Even through the Archdiocese of Detroit at a presentation earlier this year. And then our experiences beyond some of those conference presentations. Also, I was able to attend the National Association of National Automotive Dealers Association. You're messing me up. National Automotive Dealers Association. I was able to attend their dealer academy last year and understand how general manager would execute the dominance all the months. That really helped in the research as well. And then we're looking to submit. We currently have one work under revision. We'll be submitting more of these journals research opportunities, there's really a lot of them. It really condensed down to 50 there are, just talking about those, I think. More thoroughly understand the win-win deals. How do they get there? Where do they come from? How does that happen? On the quantitative analysis, we assume that the variables were linear in nature for the most part, but it may not be. In other words, as you maybe increase a certain quantity of something, maybe there's a diminishing return at some point. We have to analyze the detail. More comprehensive data, we get transaction level data. Again, that TMS data that exists out there, we can get how that works. Other departments, as you can imagine, we focused on new vehicle sales performance, but I mentioned there's other departments as well that have their own performance metrics. And we can create that feedback loop. Qualitatively, consider other constructs. We've looked at quite a few, but there's a lot out there to potentially evaluate. We could throw surveys in front of dealers to understand a lot more. We could also distribute the survey more broadly and ask a lot of other dealerships as well about their opinions, feelings. We could look at other KPIs as well, like loyalty. And then combining the two together, I think would be just being able to take all of the metrics from a quantitative perspective as well as the survey results, bring them together to figure out what are the most statistically significant. Mixing them would be very, very insightful. As well as creating new variables, interaction effects. This is something more statistical in nature where some high-level software can help us identify how different things interact with all the elements that we have. We created our own by coming up with them on our own, but systems can help you identify even more. And finally, our contributions. Most important thing. We developed and validated a process looking at objective data. And this is objective data, not opinion, objective. We realized that we need brand-wide benchmarking to be able to do this analysis. We did a focus on our recommendations versus generally examined. And we put Altman in here. Many people are familiar with Altman's work in businesses. He's done this for years, from 1968, looking at what are some of the key factors that drive businesses being successful or not. Actually, a lot of businesses around bankruptcy. What drives businesses to actually be successful in the long run versus I can predict in his analysis where certain businesses could go bankrupt in the next couple of years with very good accuracy. But those metrics, as good as they were, and it's great to be able to identify them, did not provide a lot of action points. We were able to get to the point where we're able to give more tailored, detailed, actionable recommendations. Again, can be applied to the franchise organization. We did our surveys and interviews relative to automotive retail, applied what we learned from literature there for that application. Then we're able to follow processes that exist as well as the principal components, things that have been done outside of automotive and other analyses to create these factors and figure out their influence on the observed results that we had. And then we're able to provide case studies to actually show that say the applied. Based upon that, I thank you all for being here today, and
just ask the questions from the audience first.
don't be shy.
Survey. Change a salesperson.
Hard to say without actually doing it, but our focus was on management alone, understanding their perspective and that they're making the decisions. But yes, they're very much experiencing as well. And we actually talked about a bit early on, developing surveys, employees, sales teams, service providers, and understanding their perspective as well. But I think when you would goals that you can address your department to address. Tries to,
Any thoughts on your factor 5, that customer focused impact sales?
So it wasn't strong, don't forget that. Statistically, we had to put that aside.
Very good.
But yeah, again, why does that impact sales? I don't know. I have to look at the questions again. Generally speaking, again, if it's not statistically mattering, I think kind of ignore that. But yeah, there's any number. Again, getting into the individual questions, we have to examine that and see what, and we can do that. What are some of those factors that might relate relative to how does this impact sales from with the question actually asked? Because a lot of that, these are, again, contracts these are accumulated factors together that are trying to say something, but the general term relative to that, and yes, it should have a positive impact. I think that's the biggest thing. But if it does impact profitability positively, maybe that's get folks coming through. I don't know, along down the road where they have a bad experience, does it report a negative impact? One, I don't know. We'd have to.
I have a question about your takeaways. You did a lot of analytics. You had a lot of intuition. Consultants out there. What's the takeaway that you would say, hey, that's an insight that we analyzed that really wasn't intuitive, but based on your research, analytics, new takeaway, your process. Now that's good. That's something.
A very good question. Yeah, it's funny, as you mentioned, experience. I think Dr. Chim and I had many discussions about applying experience to this process. And again, as I mentioned throughout, a lot of this is based upon, taking the literature and things that exist and be able to expound upon that and look at things in a different light. What I personally learned that I thought was very interesting, I think, is really that qualitative piece where we have all these factors that are opposing in nature. And here we are consistently trying to balance both the manufacturer and the dealership's perspectives and goals. And it's clearly very difficult. I think we've effectively proven that it should be difficult because these things are so different. And we already know from the quantitative side that dealerships, for instance, as we bring up inventory, don't necessarily want to hold the amounts that we would be recommending sometimes. And that's a challenge for them. Experience with one of the dealerships that we researched eventually could persuade one to increase inventory, but it took a lot of arm twisting in order for them to get to that point. So I think it's just a better realization of there's a lot of work to do to be able to kind of smooth over how both sides need to work together. I think it's a great opportunity as well. That's why I have a lot of future research opportunities here also, is to be able to better understand that, be able to dig in deeper to be able to provide more insights to both sides.
Small questions. One, what was your metric for turnover or the level?
So we used days supply originally, and we looked at that when we showed you the two charts at the bottom of the slides. Day supply is the common industry metric, which again is basically I have 30 units and I sell one a day, therefore I have 30 days supply. That's how long it would take for me to run out if I didn't get any more. We looked at day supply relative to the expected amount of sales you should have. So that day supply metric, the first one I mentioned, was relative to my current sales rate. So I normally sell one a day. But what if I'm supposed to sell two a day? Well, then you only have 15 days in that case. 30 divided by 2 in that case, from 2 that usually are supposed to sell each
So
day.
it's volume adjustment.
Right, based upon expectations, not actual.
And then, did you stratify your analysis across any type of product mix or market, like luxury?
Yeah, there were various brands involved. Something I did mention earlier is that relative to these performance metrics is that there's a process that exists to come up with them, the sales effectiveness metric, that takes into account, in order to come up with this expected number of sales, a segment adjustment process. So it looks at the popularity in any given area of certain segments. For instance, in Alaska, you're not going to sell a lot of convertibles, right? So if I use some average that says, national average of what percentage of my sales should be convertibles, obviously it would be low in Alaska compared to a national average. But then in Florida, it would be high. Well, I've got to be able to adjust for that and to know that. Similarly, in New York versus Texas, New York's going to not have a lot of pickup trucks, but Texas, we know they do. We've got to be able to adjust for that difference. That's where that expectation value comes from in non-sales. So yes, we do take those factors into account when we look at different brands, and there were different brands included in the analysis. The question.
How do you take into account sales turnover?
Salesperson turnover. So we were just looking at quantity at a given point in time. The source of that data was financial statements, which is always the best. Data quality is always a challenge with any of this type of analysis. But it's generally down the right pathway. So analyzing that data did provide us some insight. We couldn't look at specific turnover. If we were to do the analysis, the hypothesis of analysis would be to more specifically understand when people are actually in dealerships, working there, to be able to quantify that over a period of time as people come and go, being able to look at by day, even potentially if that data was available, get a better sum of the capacity of the dealership. But turnover, yes. Does that have an impact? It could or could not. And that's another tough part of salesperson. It gets to the quality of the salespeople in talking about their experience, in talking about their understanding of their market, understanding if they have what we call a book of business or not, if they have a bunch of clients from the past that they can call upon. All questions that we'd love to ask and get data on. If we had that, it would provide a lot more insight into the individuals and be able to come up with better analysis and things. Questions? Okay.
Can you tell how long it would take their sales experts or is there a general?
About 2 days. That's lying. No, that's not true. Yeah, I mean, ideally, it would be great to know. I think, again, future research would tell that through applying this over and over and over and over again to see how impactful the changes are. Again, the first thing is these dealers have to accept that they're deficient in these areas and make change. The example I just gave relative to one dealership that was examined, again, the harm twins had to occur over 6 to 8 months to say, hey, this is your problem, hey, this is your problem, hey, this is your problem, and get them to actually act upon it. That's step one. And then step two is to be able to actually see what impact that had on the operation as a whole or these certain metrics. And it's, from where you are, your market, everything is different. The people that you're working with, that they just explained to Mr. Phillips, relative to the personnel that are there, are they able to handle the situation? You have more inventory. Are the personnel experienced enough to be able to handle that? Maybe there are enough of them, but maybe they're not of good enough quality to be able to get the job done. So there's so many moving parts, and we're trying to just refine that down to obviously some low-hanging fruit through the analysis. But I think that would take a lot of individual case-by-case assessment to figure out the timing impact. It would be great to get.
Mark, you see an opportunity to look at satisfaction.
Yeah, consumer satisfaction data would be great to understand better and feel and incorporate. Through research I've done in the past, we found that the actual surveys that are provided don't always provide a lot of insight due to the fact that rewards are provided. So, as many of you may have experienced either on the sales or service side, either the salesperson or the service writer might say, hey, you're going to get a survey, or back in the day, kind of like I was using paper, but I realized that we don't do it via paper anymore. You're going to get a survey, and you need to fill this out and give me the highest score because that's how I practically get paid. They may not say that, but that's true. I mean, they're paid through their pay plans in many cases, as we talk to many of these dealerships based upon those CSI scores that come in. So it would have to be something divorced from that. That's the only way you're gonna get a lot of relationship, I think, there, to be able to understand truly. And maybe it just requires more detail. I don't know what the exact mechanism is, but you'd have to have another one rather than the way that they do things today to be able to get data that's of any use, any insight. We have seen, however, through some data analysis that over certain values of satisfaction, that you have a greater propensity to perform better in certain ways, relative to certain key performance outcomes. But it's not a guarantee. So whether that's anything or not, I'm not really sure. And I don't know that plays a big role in this, other than to say, here's maybe a level that's the minimum that the manufacturer could use in order to suggest to their dealers they need to be over that. Have a good impact on it.
Any other questions? Any questions?
Seriously, and nothing? All right. If that's required for this, then I'm not.
So please excuse us, and you can, go on to the balcony.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for not falling asleep, and thank you for the information.